They held the commendation ceremony for me on the Wednesday. I didn't attend, of course, but I'm told it was very moving. The commissioner was there and the mayor. The shootout in the Interstellar Space Terminal had made the news all across the solar system. The commissioner presented a medal to my stand-in, my dad, who'd flown in all the way from Earth, and then the mayor gave the commissioner an award from the city to be displayed in ESPD headquarters. Bogdan got a medal as well, and the other members of the protection detail all got ribbons. Cue fanfare and applause. There was a reception afterwards. It's a shame I missed it, really. I would have loved to hobnob with the mayor. He was the first politician I ever voted for, one of the last, too. Then I woke up. The first thing I realized was Zach wasn't there, so I started screaming. And I mean really screaming, like a stimhead who'd injected a Saturday night special was about to make it everyone's problem. It was only when I heard my mom's voice that I stopped to look around. I was in the hospital. I had tubes in me, and I was wired up like one of those old-timey bombs with the large digital clocks. Briefly, I wondered which one I had to cut to defuse myself, which made me giggle. That was when I realized I probably was on drugs. In fact, from the number of tubes, it looked like I was on more drugs than I'd busted during my rotation with Vice. It took a while before I was lucid enough to explain things to me. They started with my injuries. Firstly, the flesh wound in my upper arm, not serious, and with modern medicine wouldn't even leave a scar. That was the good news. The less good news was the torso. Mercifully, my armor vest had done its job for the most part, and the bullets hadn't penetrated. In order to smuggle his rifle through the station, the hitmen used a fairly low-powered variant. However, they had hit me hard enough to break 2 of my ribs and cause a moderate amount of internal bleeding. The thigh wound had been the worst. The bullet had penetrated deep enough to nick an artery, and if I'd arrived in the operating room a minute or 2 later, I might not have made it. And because the machine pistol was also low power, the bullet hadn't gone straight through, meaning I'd undergone a long and complicated surgery to remove it. The surgeons were hopeful that I'd make a full recovery, but that was still a hope more than a promise, and either way I'd be off my feet for a while. Then they reached the subject I was really interested in, Zach. I braced myself for bad news. Zach was fine. The shootout had ended shortly after I lost consciousness when the sniper fell from the gantry, down more than 50 feet onto the faux marble, so he'd never be a problem again, except to the cleaning crew. The official explanation was that he slipped while trying to flee, but it was assumed Bogdan's flares were a contributory factor. Both shooters had been identified as guns for hire from the local Kevilite community, fairly high-end. As soon as it was clear to move, Lieutenant Santos had left 2 men to watch me, and with the rest, got Zach out of there. They had to prise his fingers off my leg, pick him up, and carry him to the embarkation gate. But they got him out of there. His grandfather was at the gate to take him, and they were on the space liner within 10 minutes, then out of the solar system a few hours later. By now, they'd be back on Kevil. He was okay. I breathed a sigh of relief. It had been a bumpy ride, but we'd got there. And if there was a part of me that hurt more than the pain in my arm, or chest, or leg, well, there was no sense in dwelling on that. Saying goodbye to Zach was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, but it was worth it to know he was safe. So that's it. Story over. My first case, made a friend, got a few Kevilite bullets in me, but it worked out for the best. All wrapped up pretty neatly, right? Nothing's ever that simple. As you know, that was far from the last time we had Kevilites causing trouble. Wasn't the last time I was shot by a Kevilite, for that matter. The war came, 5, 6 years later? Life had knocked a few of the rough edges off me by that point, but I was still young, still eager to do my part. I'd seen plenty of violence, or thought I had, and I knew how to handle a weapon. I thought I could make a difference. Maybe I'd still sign up if I had to do it all over again, but I sure as hell would have had less of a spring in my step as I went to the recruiting office. It was on my 3rd tour of duty. Out on the old Chinese mining colonies in the Guangdong system, asteroids riddled with tunnels and rusting equipment that no one had used in decades. Too much rock to blast the enemy out, too valuable as a forward operating base to ignore. Not that different to Europa Station for the most part. Claustrophobic corridors that all looked the same, blind corner after blind corner. never knowing what you'd run into around the next one. The Kevilite Alliance got there first, so we had to go in and winkle them out, room by room, section by section. I was a captain by that point. Benefits of a war like that, you get promoted fast. Shiny new regiment, put together from a couple that had been shot up too bad to go on, including mine. 2 companies were drawing the enemy's fire at the main dock, while mine and another penetrated its secondary airlocks and pushed in towards the command center. I was leading Delta Company, 4 platoons under my command, and we were doing well. They were making us pay for every room, but we were pushing them back. After a while, I got word that Gamma Company had taken the command center, and the whole Kevilite resistance was collapsing, breaking up into small units fighting desperate last stands. The Kevilites I was fighting started falling back, probably trying to link up with what remained of their forces so they could stage a counterattack. I wasn't about to let that happen, so I managed to pin them down for a bit and get 2 of my platoons behind them. In the end, I penned them up in one of the huge hangars that used to hold the mining drills. If I took the pressure off for even a moment, they'd break out again, but I had them trapped. It was all but over. Question was, how long would it take for them to admit it? Kevilites didn't give up easily, as I well knew. I could easily lose a third of my company trying to scour them out of every nook and cranny. We'd get them in the end, but it'd be bloody. So I decided to try and talk to them. Even the Kevilites have rules in war, and after a bit of back and forth, we called a temporary truce. I stepped out into the hangar, realized I had no clue what I was going to say, and decided to just wing it. We've got you surrounded. It's over, and you know it. There's no point in dragging this out, but I promise you, if you surrender, you'll be treated well. Someone shouted back at me from behind a stack of crates. I have a counteroffer, human. You let us pull back to our shuttles, and we'll let you keep this worthless rock. Let me get my warriors out of here, or I will make you pay in blood for every step forward you take. I shook my head. Sorry, can't do it. As much as I'd like to finish this without a slaughter, I can't let you go, or you'll be back shooting at us next week. That is true enough, the voice admitted with a laugh. A valid fear. You were lucky this time, but meet us again and we will kill you all. You would be a fool to let us go. For the record, I don't want to do this. Come on. There has to be some way we can talk this out, please. There was a pause, and I thought the enemy commander was thinking about my offer. Then he said something that came completely out of left field. Did you used to be a lawman on Europa Station? I stopped, like an old-timey computer that had crashed. How the hell could he know who I was? Was he someone I'd arrested once? I knew there was something familiar about the Kevilite's voice, but for a second I couldn't place it. Then it hit me. Zach. It is you, then. He stepped out from behind one of the crates. He was taller now, and he'd filled out well. An adult Kevilite in his prime, 200 pounds of muscle and aggression, but there was still something recognizable in his face. And it is you, I replied. What? I mean, how? I wanted to ask him how he'd ended up here, but that was obvious. He was a Kevilite, just the right age for conscription, and he spoke a human language fluently and knew our culture. The galaxy is smaller than you'd think, so instead I asked him, "How have you been, kid?" "Not bad, thanks to you. You know, all these years I thought you were dead. No one ever told me what happened to you, and well, last time I saw you, yeah, wasn't pretty, but I pulled through. If I'd known, I might have tried to..." He stopped and flicked his ears in irritation. "I don't know, do something. Did you ever think about me, about getting in touch?" "Did I think about you? Of course. Every day for months, and after that still fairly often, but you had a new life. The whole point was for you to leave what happened on Europa Station behind." I looked around pointedly at the Kevilite soldiers training their guns on me. "You know, we've got to decide what we're going to do about this." A low growl emerged from the back of Zach's throat. "There's nothing to decide. We're Kevilites. We fight. You'll lose, maybe. But if we do, we'll take a lot of you with us. You'll take some of us with you, and then you'll all be dead. And for what? Your position's hopeless. If I were in your place, I'd surrender. You're human, though. You're weak. You don't like fighting. When things get bad, you just give up. We're Kevilites. We don't give up, ever. Even if we lose this battle, we'll never give up because we're strong. That's why we'll win eventually. his grandfather's words, and all the other Kevilites he'd lived around since I last saw him. Growing up on Europa Station, with a father who was willing to come to an alien world, and who was willing to stand up to someone like Razave. There'd been something different about Zach. He'd seen a universe most of his kind didn't get to see, but after 6 years on their home planet, it seemed like he was just another Kevilite now. Or was he? Maybe I was just imagining it. Maybe it was just what I wanted to see, but something in his eyes said he didn't really believe the words he was saying. I decided to test it. No, that's why you'll always lose, because no matter how many other species you defeat, you'll still live in a society run by bullies who think strength is having the power to push people around. Nothing will ever change. Nothing will ever get better. And good men will keep dying because some clan boss took offense over nothing and leave behind kids who deserve better. It was a low blow, I knew, but it had to be said. Zach went real still, and for a moment I thought he was going to leap forward and bite my throat out. But then he said quietly, "We're still Kevilites. I never said you weren't, but maybe being a Kevilite doesn't have to mean what people like Razave think it does." I could see he was thinking, but I couldn't tell which way it was going to go. My words had hit the mark, but they had to get through layers of Kevilite tradition that were millennia thick. The seconds ticked by. I couldn't bear it. "You know I mean it when I say we'll treat you right. You and your warriors. Come on, please. Don't make me do this. Not after everything." He looked at me, and I could just see the sadness in his eyes behind the mask of Kevilite aggression. "I have to talk this over with my clan brothers. I will tell them your offer is genuine, but after that, either way, thank you. For everything." I nodded. "I'll give you 10 minutes. He turned and went back into cover, and I retreated back to our line. I felt sick to my stomach. Any moment now, I was going to have to order my men to storm the hangar, and every Kevilite in there was going to die, including Zach. But the ball was in their court now. There was nothing I could do. "Sorry, kid," I tried. Just before the 10 minutes were up, they surrendered. I think it was probably the single happiest moment of my life. Zach was taken back to Sol as a POW, put in an internment facility on Mars for the rest of the war, along with the 120 warriors he'd been commanding that day. I came back to visit him as often as I could, which wasn't as often as I'd have liked, but there was a war on. I tried to make sure he got the best accommodations, the best food, but he refused it. Wouldn't take anything that wasn't offered to the rest of his clan. It wasn't that bad. God knows we both lived with worse on Europa Station. But I wished there was more I could do for him. But he seemed content and happy to see me whenever I could make it. It was amazing how easily we fell back into each other's company when we'd known each other for all of a week the first time around. I guess sometimes it's the quality rather than the quantity of time you spend together. I even smuggled him some pizza once, which was about the biggest gift I could get him to accept. I at least made damn sure the guards knew that if anything happened to him, then I, a captain and a war hero, would see to it they ended up at the very frontmost of the front lines. There was interclan violence in the POW camps, and rumors the guards encouraged it. I wasn't about to take chances. The guards told me Zach was one of the ones who could take care of themselves. Most Kevilites came in injured. They hadn't surrendered willingly. They'd just been captured when the rest of their unit was dead, and they were too beat up to go on fighting. Whereas Zach was as fit as Kevilites got, and he had a bunch of his clan brothers to back him up, and better than that, he had a personality beyond mindless belligerence. The guards liked him because he didn't make trouble and he didn't invite trouble, but they assured me, with my face right up in theirs, that they'd take special care he was all right. 2 more years, the longest 2 years of my life. It was almost more stressful coming home from the front, wondering whether Zach would still be there. But he was, waiting for me every time. And when we finally won, or at least didn't lose, which was basically the same thing when the Kevilites were supposed to steamroll us easily, he was there to greet me when I came home for the final time. I was able to get him released on parole until he could be repatriated. We had some good times together, bumming about the solar system on my officer's pass. Eventually, he had to go home with the rest of his clan brothers. We kept in touch, but I didn't see him for a while after that. He was busy. There were changes on Kevil after the war didn't turn out the way it was supposed to. Changes Zach had a lot to do with. A lot of people accused him of weakness for getting captured, but unlike most Kevilites, instead of choosing between violence or silence, Zach argued back. With words. He wasn't the one who lost the war, but he did bring 120 of his brothers home. He told them that strength doesn't just have to be the power to hurt your enemies. It can be protecting the ones you love, too. A lot of the younger Kevilites agreed with him across the clans. They'd taken heavy casualties at the behest of their elders, and after the war, many of them started to ask why. And once they started questioning the war, they started questioning other things about Kevilite society as well. Kevil didn't change overnight, but it changed. They're still not exactly pacifists, but compared to what they were when I was young, you could probably walk around Kevil for a whole month and not get murdered, which would have been unthinkable back in the day. After the war, I went back to being a cop, on Venus for a while and then back to Earth. Life got busy, both with work and family, and there were times I couldn't see Zach as much. But we never lost touch. Never again. I keep calling him Zach. He's Zamazak now, and from what he tells me about his grandson, he'll probably have to find another syllable soon. Yeah, Zamazak rather than Kemazak. He took his father's name, but when it was time for him to become a grandfather, well, he didn't want to repeat the mistakes his own grandfather made. Actually, I shouldn't even call him Zamazak. He's General Zamazak, Commander-in-Chief of the Kevilite Union military. The clans still have their own forces, but now there's a unified cross-clan force to balance them out, to make sure that clan bosses can't just do whatever they want, and someone is there to protect those who need protecting, a different kind of strength. I couldn't be prouder of him.